You're welcome to The Inside. I am Bartley Jonathan. Today we are looking at the COVID-19 pandemic threat in Cameroon and the rest of Africa, the future of the continent with regards to the global health challenge and how to prevent the worst earlier announced by the World Health Organization Director General, and the World Health Organization has warned that Africa could become the next epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. According to United Nations official, it is feared that the pandemic could kill at least 300,000 persons on the African continent and push nearly 30 million Africans into poverty. The World Health Organization says that the virus is fast spreading away from urban centers in Africa into the hinterlands, and there have been almost 1,000 deaths and over 19,000 infections across Africa. More than one-third of Africa's population lack access to adequate water supplies, and nearly 60% of urban dwellers live in overcrowded slums. These conditions, according to the World Health Organization, conditions in which the virus could thrive. Coming up, meet our guest. Our first guest in this edition of The Inside is joining us from Louisville in the United States of America. Dr. Wilson ESEME is a medical doctor specialized in preventive medicine. He was trained at the University Teaching Hospital KIUS in Yaoundé, Cameroon's political capital, and the University College London and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He studied preventive medicine at the Mehari Medical College in the United States of America and obtained a certification in health management from Harvard University. Dr. Wilson ESEME, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
All right. What is the level of the COVID-19 outbreak where you are in Louisville?
Louisville, Kentucky has not been very hard hit, but in the United States as a whole, it is huge. You know, Jonathan, the United States is 4% of the world's population, that accounts for 33%, a third of all the positive cases, and 1/4, that is 25% of all the deaths so far. So this is a huge deal in the United States as a whole.
What's the situation of Cameroonians and other Black Africans in particular in the United States of America today?
I'm glad you asked that question. You see, in the United States, blacks, African Americans, or Americans from Africa, always fare worse than whites in any health parameter. And this is the same thing we are seeing with COVID-19. I'll give you a few examples. In the city of Chicago, Chicago has about 29% of the population, is blacks, but 52% of all the positive cases of COVID-19 are blacks. Another example, the state of Louisiana, where 33% of the people are blacks, but account for 70% of all the cases. So blacks are disproportionately affected more than whites. And the reason is simple, Jonathan. Blacks are poorer. They are more likely than, less likely than whites to have health insurance and have less access to quality health care and treatment.
Is it just about the fact that the blacks are poorer and so more vulnerable to the COVID-19? What are other factors that can explain this high number as far as the COVID-19 infection is concerned, and the blacks?
Primarily, it's poverty and the access to health care. You see, blacks compared to whites are more likely to have uncontrolled conditions like diabetes, like high blood pressure, like chronic lung diseases, blacks are more likely to have these conditions that are not controlled, that are not treated. So on top of these conditions, if you add any other infection like COVID-19, then it even makes it worse. And to be honest with you, the reasons are also historical. I know the United States is seen as the beacon of justice and freedom in the world. The truth, Jonathan, is that there is great injustice in this country, not only in the justice system, but also in the health system. So blacks, compared to whites, are more likely not to have health insurance. So without health insurance, they don't go to the hospitals. And if they don't go to the hospitals, they don't get treated. Okay, so those are some of the reasons.
The injustice you're talking about in the United States of America with regards to blacks, is it similar to what is happening in China?
Oh, you know, I think the situation in China is different. It's different because I saw the videos, and most people have seen videos where blacks have been, badly treated because of the sense that they carry the virus, which is not true. In the United States, it's not like that. It is because blacks are more likely to live in conditions that favor the spread of the virus. I'll give you an example. If you go to any big city in the United States, blacks primarily live in areas where there is overcrowding in the center of the cities, whereas whites will live in suburbia, away from the city center, where they have more land and they have more breathing space. So that's just an example.
What accounts for that? Is it that the blacks are not or do not have access to facilities that can help them, that can boost their financial strength and enable them to live in those places where they will be less exposed to health challenges?
Yes, the economic impact. See, before this virus, so some 2 months ago, the unemployment rate in the United States was around 4%. That's for all Americans. But in the black community, the unemployment rate was closer to 10%. In certain cases, actually more than 10%. So consistently, blacks are more likely to be unemployed than whites. And if you are unemployed, Jonathan, it means that you don't have money. You don't have money to live in a good neighborhood. You don't have money to eat the right foods. You don't have money to go to hospital when you're sick. So the condition of blacks, African Americans in the United States, historical, is institutional. I don't want your viewers to believe that it is only because of COVID-19 that we are seeing these disparities. No, disparities have always existed between whites and blacks in the US. And COVID-19 has only exposed these disparities even more.
Dr. Wilson ESEME, you're a medical expert and you own and run a private clinic, so you have a mastery of the functioning of the health system in the United States of America. Concerning this specific case of COVID-19, how are the black COVID-19 cases handled in the US?
Now, I can tell you this. I know there have been conspiracies out there that blacks are not treated as well as whites. Well, that is not true. So if you are a black patient and you are hospitalized for COVID-19, you're going to get the same care of treatment. Now, the difference comes if you are a black patient and you already have underlying conditions like uncontrolled diabetes, which makes your immune system even weaker. By the time you are hospitalized in the hospital, you are not, compared to a white patient, you may not respond very well to the treatment. But there is no, I don't think blacks are treated worse than whites when it comes to management of this infection.
Let's come back home to your home country, Cameroon. And you have been following up happenings in Cameroon. I know that today in Cameroon, we are at more than 1,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, tens of deaths and tens of death cases, and close to 200 persons who have been successfully treated from COVID-19. What do you think about the management of COVID-19 here in Cameroon?
The official figures from the government are probably lower than the real figures. And that's just, it makes common sense to think that way. If you don't test, you don't know. And there are a lot of asymptomatic cases among the community. See, this virus doesn't manifest in everyone. And most of the people that have been tested in Cameroon are people who have presented with symptoms. Now, what about those out there in the community who have no symptoms, or maybe because of where they live, they have not sought care? And there are lots of them in the community, I can tell you that. So yes, you are correct. And I agree with the local medical experts that the true figures of COVID-19 in Cameroon is probably 10, 20 times higher than the official figures.
The figures are, however, very much lower than the figures in most European countries, in the United States of America, and even some African countries. But the government has been fighting COVID-19 with a battery of over 20 measures and other accompanying measures taken by some ministries, notably the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Trade. But over the weeks, the figures have constantly been rising at a considerable speed. What explains this?
I think it's because of a couple of things. Number one, I think the government, again, and I say this with all humility and honesty and due respect for authority, government measures are not enforceable like they should be. Okay, so if you say social distances, normally people are supposed to be at least 6 feet apart, 2 meters on average, right? But I see videos in Cameroon where people are still doing business almost as if nothing is going on. So if you still have this overcrowding, people are still going into bars and restaurants and to markets, then you are increasing the risk of the spread of the virus. Another thing is widespread testing, which is not available, okay? So if you are not testing, then you don't see the numbers. What will explain, in my opinion, what actually explains why Cameroon, the numbers in Cameroon are actually way ahead compared to neighboring countries, I think it's just indiscipline, okay? People should be educated and encouraged to social distance, to rigorously and religiously wash their hands as many times as possible and stay at home, protect the elderly. If we do these measures, if these measures are, because these are the same measures that we're doing in the United States. We don't use extra measures that are not, different from those in Cameroon. I'll give you an example, Jonathan. Since this virus started, I had to shut down my clinic. I sent my staff home and my nurses. I'm the only one there at the clinic. And every now and then I see a patient. When they come to me, I am appropriately masked, and they have to stand at a distance of at least 6 feet. Okay, I don't do any physical examination, and I'm actually doing more and more of my encounters through telehealth, through video conferencing. I don't touch people.
And looking at the issue of mass testing, do you think if the government of Cameroon were to do this, not only in Douala, because this has already been done in Douala by the Ministry of Public Health, though but 14% of the homes visited expressed resistance if this were to be done in Yaoundé, in Douala, in Boya, in Limbe, in other parts of the country where the virus, where some positive cases have been recorded, and even beyond, this will help to mitigate the impact. This will help to prevent the spread of the virus.
Indeed, it will. But here's the catch. It takes a cost to test. Even in the United States, wide testing is not available. The governors had a conference the other day that the federal government has not given them, the resources to make testing available. You see, Jonathan, this is important because when you are talking of reopening the economy, when you are talking about reopening schools and businesses and return to life as a normal life, then you have to have a system in place where anyone who needs a test can be tested. If you and I work in the same building, Jonathan, it's important that you know my status. It's also important that I know your status. And how do we do that? You have to be tested, and I have to be tested. If I know you are negative and I'm negative, I will be comfortable working in the same environment as you. But if I do not know, then it's a problem. So when I hear the government of Cameroon planning to reopen the country in June, and I say, you are basing this decision on what? It has to be based on scientific evidence of the numbers. And I don't see the numbers yet to justify that decision.
Dr. Wilson ESEME, are you saying that the head of state's decision or instruction for schools to resume by 1st of June 2020 is not going to be feasible?
What I'm saying, Jonathan, is this, and I want to be careful. One thing is for sure. We are or by July or by December of this year. As a matter of fact, the virus will still be in this world, in Cameroon, next year. So you see what happens. Imagine this scenario for a second. Imagine we don't do anything, nothing. Okay? The virus will still disappear after a while. But unfortunately, it's going to kill hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people worldwide. So the things that we should do is to mitigate the impact of the virus. And one of the things is mass testing, appropriate treatment, and taking care of those people who are ill, and prevention. The reason you will know, how do you know that your measures are effective? You see the numbers. The virus has 3 phases. Jonathan, if you give me a few seconds to explain this. The virus has 3 phases. There is a first phase where the infection takes hold in a community. Okay, initially it rises a little bit, and then eventually it rises exponentially. And then it plateaus, and then the numbers will reduce on the other side of the curve. So you have to let the virus determines when you are going to reopen your country. And the way you do that is to show the numbers. If Cameroon, if the authorities can show that, hey, look at this, our numbers are going down, they're going down, and because of the curve of the virus, we can now tell that we are defeating the infection. Now we can open the economy. Then that will be justification. But what we cannot do is to arbitrarily say we are going to open the economy on this day without any justification.
What can be done for that to be possible? What can be done with the case of Cameroon in particular? What can be done to ensure that in the next weeks the virus is contained?
I'll tell you my fear, Jonathan, the fear that I have. When I look at the curve of the virus and I look at what is going on, my fear is that Africa as a whole, Cameroon in particular, is lagging behind in the curve. So the worst is still not there. We are still going to see the worst in Cameroon. In the next 3 to 4 weeks, the numbers are going to go up. You see this United States. In the last 5 weeks, 22 million people have lost their jobs. To put it in perspective, all the economic gains that this country made in terms of employment from 2008, all these gains have been wiped out in the last 5 weeks by the virus. It is terrible. So I really hope your viewers and the Cameroon authorities, and I think they do understand the severity and the seriousness of this. It is serious. The good news that I can see, if there is a silver lining to this cloud, is that the country was shut down, was closed just in time before the huge waves of the virus were experienced in Europe and in the United States. So I'm thinking that if the authorities can quickly isolate, trace those people who already have the infections, isolate and treat them, then Cameroon will be in a better shape. The challenge, though, is to how do you know the few people who have the virus, who are in the community, who are not symptomatic. The only way to do that is through mass testing. Unfortunately, mass testing requires a lot of resources, a lot of money. I'm not sure the government has that kind of money, but the WHO and other organizations can help in this regard.
There has been a sharp increase in the number of COVID-19 cases on the African continent. In the past week, there have been almost 1,000 deaths and over 19,000 infections across Africa. And the World Health Organization is warning that the epicenter of the virus could move to Africa in the weeks ahead. What do you think about this?
Absolutely. Yes, and I agree, and it's what I was telling you about, the curve of the virus. If you see where Africa is in the first phase of that curve I explained to you earlier. You see, so the virus is still taking hold, and you can tell by the numbers. Cameroon is where the United States was 2 months ago, to put things in perspective. Where Cameroon is currently is where the US was 2 months ago. So you can tell and you can see and you can project that in the next few weeks, things are going to get really bad. They're not going to get really bad because anybody is doing anything wrong. They're going to get bad because that's the natural life cycle of the virus. It's going to pick up exponentially and then plateaus before it goes down. So I think the WHO is basing that projection on just the normal life cycle of the virus.
And UN officials are saying that it is feared the pandemic could kill at least 300,000 persons in Africa and pushed about 30 million into poverty, as the World Health Organization indicates that the virus seems to be spreading far away from the urban centers in Africa into the hinterlands, where over 1/3 of Africa's population lack access to adequate water supplies, and nearly 60% of urban dwellers live in overcrowded slums. These, of course, are conditions that could work in favor of the spread of the virus.
The United States of America is by far the richest country on earth. There's no comparison. There are more health resources and facilities in this country than any other country in the world. Okay, I'll give you an example. There's a city in the US called Baltimore. Baltimore City has more CT scans than the entire France. So when it comes to health resources, there is no comparison with the United States. Yet, this infection is having a huge impact. About 60 to 100,000 Americans are projected to die from this virus. You know, just let that sink in for a few seconds. If the most powerful and richest country in the world is suffering like this, just imagine what can happen in Africa, where the resources are very limited. So I think the authorities should take this very, very seriously, educate the people, and let them know this is not a joke. This virus has the potential of killing millions in the African continent if mitigation efforts are not ramped up and really enforced.
The president of Burkina Faso, Christian Kabore, has decided to offer 6 months of his salary for the fight against COVID-19. The prime minister of the country, 4 months, state ministers, 2 months, and the other ministers, 1 month. What's your take on this initiative?
I think those are laudable initiatives, but do you really think those salaries will have any impact? I mean, how much does the president earn? How much do they, you know, the real impact, in my humble opinion, will be in a place like Cameroon to basically suspend utility payments for electricity and for water for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 months. This will help the people even more than a few ministers and, you know, president not getting their salaries. Imagine if SNEC, I don't know if they still call it SNEC, the water corporation in Cameroon and the electricity corporation in Cameroon, if they were to say, okay, for the next 4 months, nobody's going to pay anything. Oh, that would be a huge economic boost to accompany the economic impact that is going to happen, because it's going to be huge.
Right. Now, what are some of the measures that you think, apart from what you have indicated, those relief measures that should be taken to mitigate the impact of the virus on individuals, on businesses, on the economy, and also to facilitate the implementation of the government anti-COVID-19 measures? What are the other emergency measures that can be taken by African heads of states, by even the African Union, to help to stop the spread of this virus, to prevent the virus from getting to uncontrollable levels, to prevent the worst announced by the World Health Organization director some weeks back?
Yes, and I'm hoping, you know, there is a saying that never let a crisis go to waste. My hope, Jonathan, is that this is a wake-up call to all African leaders. This is a wake-up call. We now understand that our continent is very fragile. Fragile because we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the resources to defend ourselves from any serious health pandemic like this one. So you ask me what are the measures we can do. The first thing is to build a good health infrastructure. The next thing is to make sure that the people have the basic things that they need for life. I'm talking about water, I'm talking about power, I'm talking about roads and food security. Right now, it's too late to do those things. But my hope is that this will make our leaders to start to think that eventually we'll have to get these things done. For now, in addition to all the other measures that you mentioned, the government should start looking at ways of providing people with food. You know, I just told you the example here in the US where 22 million people have lost their jobs just in the last 5 weeks alone. The US government has signed a stimulus package where people are going to get a lot of money. Some people are going to get thousands of dollars. I don't know if the government of Cameroon can afford to do that, but at least they can try. They can try to make sure that people who have lost their jobs, who can no longer go to their businesses. They still have food to eat by subsidizing and making sure that they buy food and they open food pantries and stores all over the country where people can go and get gari and rice and beans for free, or at least highly subsidized prices, so that people will not die of hunger. Because this thing is serious and it's not going to go away next month. It's going to linger around for some time.
Can a lockdown be implemented in Cameroon? A total lockdown in Cameroon. What is required for that?
A total lockdown is like what we have in the US. You see, I am here speaking to you from my home office. So I'm home. I look out the window. I live in a neighborhood that is far from the city center. But when I look out the window right now, I don't see anybody. Now this is unusual. Usually I will see my neighbors moving around, walking their dogs and their cats and just having a good time. There's nobody out there because people know the severity of this issue. When I drive to my job, which takes me about 20 minutes, I hardly see cars. All businesses have been shut down. That is what a total lockdown means. There are only few grocery stores that are open to sell food, and the pharmacies are also open. That's total lockdown. What you have in Cameroon, at least from what I see, is not total lockdown. It's a joke. It's a joke. It's like as if people have not yet grasped the severity of this infection. Total lockdown means total lockdown. It means you only go out when required. And if you are not an essential worker, meaning you're working in the health industry or in a grocery or in a pharmacy, you do not go out. Even the clinics have been shut down. That's total lockdown.
No, there are political, civil society leaders and other medical experts like you who are highlighting lots of challenges linked to the implementation, the possible implementation of total lockdown or even partial lockdown in Cameroon. And these challenges notably concern the fact that a good chunk of the population of Cameroon live below the poverty line, and many Cameroonians are living on a day-to-day basis, and it's going to be very difficult for them to survive if a lockdown was to be implemented in Cameroon. And that is why I asked the question, what is required? What can be put in place as a strategy, as a measure that will help in the implementation of a lockdown in order to bring down the COVID-19 curve?
You know, the other day I was watching videos and images from India and Pakistan and some other countries where the authorities there have actually using the police and even the military to enforce the lockdown laws. Maybe Cameroon should consider that. Again, now this is not easy, as you said. People are poor, people will have to go out one way or another to look for food. So the burden is actually on the government to make sure that when you ask people to stay home, they don't die of hunger. You make sure they have food and water. And that's why I said, you know, electricity bills and water bills should just be suspended for now, because they still need to have water at home, even if they don't have money to pay their bills. Okay, but the onus should be on the government. Maybe the government should deploy police officers and military. I don't even know if we have enough people in in our law enforcement agencies to actually enforce this. But the primary way is to inform the people, because an educated population is more likely to obey the others. Okay, like in the US, I mean, I don't see police officers in the street enforcing anything. That's because people understand they need to isolate, they need to social distance, they need to stay home, they need to wash their hands. People understand. Now, how is it going to happen in Cameroon? To be honest with you, I don't have the answer. Our African nations we're going to pay a price for the neglect of our health infrastructures that we have, seen in the last several decades. It's going to be a huge burden. I hope it's going to be a wake-up call. It is not easy. I feel bad for the authorities, the health authorities in Cameroon and the political authorities. This is not easy. I don't know how they're going to navigate it, but it's not easy. One thing they have to do is to get a task force, a real, not a political task force, but a medical task force. Put these people together, let them be having meetings every single day to think about strategies to mitigate the effects of this virus. It is not easy. I don't know, maybe there's such as a task force in Cameroon that I'm not aware of any.
Dr. Wilson ESEME, medical doctor specialized in preventive medicine, joining us on this edition of The Insight from Louisville, United States of America. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was my pleasure.
Coming up, meet our second guest. Thanks for staying with us. Our second guest in this edition of The Insight, Dr. MBAKO, a military doctor, is joining us from Wrexham, Wales, United Kingdom. The retired colonel is a trauma and orthopedic surgeon, presently a philanthropist on voluntary surgical missions in different African countries, including Cameroon, Malawi, Ethiopia, and the Gambia. He is also a part-time medical personnel with the United Kingdom National Health Service. Dr. MBAKO is the chairman of the Cameroon Medical Council and member of the Cameroon Doctors Association in the United Kingdom. Doctor, thanks for joining us on this edition of the program.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me.
All right,
Thank you, audience.
Let's begin with the situation where you are right now in Wrexham as far as the COVID-19 is concerned. What's the level of infection there?
The level of infection compared to the rest of the United Kingdom is quite moderate. We've had a few cases in the past few days, and we are seeing the curve of the infection is kind of bowing, and we are hoping that we will reach the peak and then we will have the curve going down as predicted. This is following the general curve of the United Kingdom, which is still very worrying, because we've had about 50,000 people new infections in the past 48 hours.
What has been the impact of the health condition, the COVID-19 health condition of the United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the people of the United Kingdom?
It has been, in fact, shocking, because in any case, we know that the virus doesn't spare anybody, and it has raised a lot of concern, because the Prime Minister didn't appear to be somebody who would not keep the regulations or the rules about social distancing, washing hands, and so on. This points to new evidence that the virus may actually be transmitted even when people are talking to each other, so that's new evidence, which probably we'll discuss later in this program. But it has been a little bit worrying that our Prime Minister has been down. Thank God he is back recuperating in his house.
Dr. MBAKO, you are a Cameroonian, and there are other Cameroonians, many of them where you are in Wales, in the United Kingdom as a whole. What information are you receiving from your fellow Cameroonians over there as far as the impact of the COVID-19 is concerned?
We are really in connection with the Cameroon Medical Council, and the doctors in all the regions, because we share a common platform, and we've been doing our best to raise funds and advice. In fact, the Cameroon Doctors Association in the UK has been very busy on the media, teaching Cameroonians how to observe the regulations that would preventive regulations that have been offered by both the World Health Organization, the British Medical Council, and also the Cameroon government.
How are the COVID-19 cases, Cameroonians a victim of this health problem, being handled there? Not only Cameroonians, other Africans.
Indeed, it's been worrying because the trend has shown, and this is the object of an investigation which is going right now, that the black and other ethnic minorities are more hit by the virus in terms of the fatality than the other, than the Caucasian population. And we're looking at certain factors which probably have to do with comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, and so on. And of course, other living conditions. It is believed that Africans and other ethnic minorities lived in crowded areas and so on. This could be contributory. But this is something that is being investigated right now.
You indicated earlier that the rate of infection among black people in the United Kingdom is quite high. Now, talking about treatment and recovery and death cases, what is the rate of Africans who are being successfully treated of COVID-19, or who have been successfully treated of COVID-19, and those who have died?
Apart from the rough figures we've had among especially medical personnel, I don't have any figures that I can show up at the moment, but we don't think that, we think that probably this representation in the medical personnel could be something that would be seen if we look very carefully at the figures, but I don't have any figures as yet. I myself just lost a very dear friend of mine with whom I grew up in Cameroon. He was one of the first to be hit. He was an engineer. So it's quite shocking, and we hear more numbers coming up every day, but with regards to the general population, I cannot give you any set numbers, any percentages with certainty.
Globally speaking, how well is the British government dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think the British government initially deviated from the World Health Organization recommendations, which were test. The World Health Organization recommended that the test should be widely used. But the British government, and I think the medical advice was that we would rather wait and see and postpone the infection rather than be aggressive. And also with regards to social distancing and other forms of like the shutdown, that was not something that was initially welcome here, and therefore it took some time before the British government, before we got onto it, and probably some people think that might have affected the infection rate we are seeing at the moment.
In Cameroon, despite the efforts of the Cameroon government, political parties, civil society leaders, religious bodies, the figures are still rising. Despite the battery of over 20 and more anti-COVID-19 measures being implemented by the Cameroon government, the COVID-19 curve continues rising, and the country is now counting more than 1,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases, and hundreds of persons, or close to 200 persons, who have been successfully treated, and tens who have died. What do you think about the situation of Cameroon?
It's worrying. I must say that there has been some effort on the part of the government and the part of the civil society, as well as the medical department, to, especially our Minister of Health, he's done a lot, shown a lot of presence and goodwill. There, I was astonished, really. We seem to be, I think, the fourth country in Africa now, after Algeria, Egypt, and South Africa. I think we are the ones trailing them. And this is quite worrying, because this infection grows in an exponential way. And the rate of infection, one person infects 2 to 3 people, and the 2 to 3 people infect 9 people, and it goes on. And therefore, it is quite worrying with this trend, what will happen in the future. Besides that, I think that we don't have the adequate measures or methods of treating this pandemic if it gets quite serious in our country. So it's quite worrying.
What else can the Cameroon government do beyond what it has already done to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in the country?
I think we've just started. I think it's only a week ago that the Prime Minister came up with new measures, which I think are quite welcome. What is important in infection, or in this case, I'm not an epidemiologist, but what I think is that people must have good knowledge of what is happening, and if they have good knowledge of the origin of the disease, how it is spread, methods of prevention and treatment, and then that is a good start, because there is a lot of controversy, people and conspiracy theories that could discourage and diverge people from actually following what is being recommended. The second stage is to have a change in our attitude. That is, and this is a problem, a cultural problem. We can see that, for example, in Asia, people are more tend to obey or to follow regulations much more than elsewhere. And I think that where you have confusion and people don't follow up, their attitude doesn't change to the disease, and therefore they cannot go to the third stage, which I call the practice. Because if you know something and you even can teach it to somebody, but if you don't practice it, then it's not. And I think that is the essential stage in fighting the disease and on the side of prevention. So I think people should stop all the controversies and conspiracy theories about the disease. They should have good knowledge of what the disease is, how it came about, how it is spread, and then we can move on to good practice, and I think that people will be compliant.
Some experts think that the Cameroon government should take more stringent measures that will bring down the COVID-19 curve in the country. And one of the measures proposed by some experts is a total or partial lockdown that should either be imposed in the cities that have already recorded COVID-19 cases, that is, as far as the partial confinement is concerned, or the whole country, that will be total confinement. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I don't think there is a one size fits all approach to this. It depends on certain things. I think that it is known that if we check how the disease is spread, the disease depends on the infectivity of the disease. The measures taken are contingent to how contagious somebody can be and the number of people they contact. So distancing already keeps those numbers down. Total shutdown is very welcome, but I think that it may cause a lot of problems in our society, especially that we are very dependent on day-to-day handout and buying stuff and the type of economy we have. So it's very difficult on the side of contagions, how contagious the person can be. Wearing masks is another addition, which I have welcomed a lot from the Prime Minister. I think everybody should be wearing masks. And then on the side of the infection, the period of infection, maybe hospitalization, and if we get some treatment, then we may shorten the time of infectivity of the patients. And of course, anybody who dies is taken out of the equation, therefore cannot infect any other person. Not that I'm wishing it, but those are just factors, right? So I think it's reasonable theoretically to talk about a shutdown like they did in Wuhan and other places in Southeast Asia, and I've done in New York. But it depends on the type of economy we have, the type of social responsibilities we have, and so on. And I think that will probably be something to consider as an extreme measure rather than a priority now.
Dr. MBAKO,
if I could add something, I would say that
go ahead,
initially, please. I think there was a hesitation on curbing and lack of compliance on curbing the infection, because this infection has come from Europe.
Can you just sit back? You're all right. Yeah, go ahead now.
This infection has come. If you look at the figures quite well, this infection has come to Cameroon from Europe. Most of it has come from France and other parts of Europe, and therefore there was a lead in, and that could have been really stopped automatically as soon as we knew that we had the first infections. But I think there was a hesitation there, which has resulted in us having these higher numbers of infected people coming into the country.
You are a philanthropist, presently on a voluntary surgical mission in the different African countries, including Malawi, Cameroon, Ethiopia, and the Gambia. How bad is the situation of Africa with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, when we look at the figures at the moment, if you just look at the figures of the whole of Africa, compare only with the less infected countries in Europe and Southeast Asia. So at the moment, it's looking as if the predictions haven't turned out that badly as they were, and that given all the parameters on the ground, that the poverty, the crowding, the compliance, I think that we are sitting on, there is a possibility that we may have an explosion even greater than we have in the United States and Europe. But that is just a prediction. There are factors that can change. So this thing has to be taken, though we have to try to prevent them. We have to take, we have to look at things as we go on.
Is it possible that Africa becomes the next COVID-19 epicenter?
Well, many people have been predicting that, and it depends on the factors, of course, that as which I've just enumerated some of the factors. And when you take those factors into consideration, you think Africa is really badly placed to deal with this pandemic, and therefore it could be potentially be the next epicenter of the infection if something doesn't happen either by us changing the paradigm or something else happening. I think that we should fear that kind of prediction.
Should African heads of states change their anti-COVID-19 strategy to prevent the worst? Earlier announced by the World Health Organization director, who said Africa should prepare for the worst.
Well, if they say, sorry, I think so, yes, we should be preparing for the worst to get something better. But if the World Health Organization and other international institutions are talking about that, we need their help, because we can see that even in Europe, the Europeans were not happy to give help to other Europeans. Italy was asking for help from France and Germany, and they wouldn't give it. Only the Cubans and the Chinese came to their help. So you see that there is a lot of talk, but I don't know whether we have that possibility financially to do what we are intended to do, you know. And that I think that what we should do, which we can do, is the prevention side of it, and we should work as hard as we can to comply with the directives that the government is trying to lead on with.
Now, Doctor, this is a purely technical question. As of now, the treatment of COVID-19 remains symptomatic, which means only the symptoms are treated. There is no cure for COVID-19 as of now. There is chloroquine, there is azithromycin, there is hydroxychloroquine that make up the package of medicines that are administered to COVID-19 patients, but the treatment remains symptomatic. What happens to the virus when somebody is finally treated and tested negative for COVID-19? Where is the virus? What happens to it?
The virus, the period during the infection period or infectious period is between 14 to 20 days. As it means if you are not really sick or you don't have any complications within 20 days, if they tested you, you should be negative. But what we do is there are two tests that you need. You need a test that identifies whether you are still infected or you are infected, and another test that identifies whether you have been infected. The first test uses the RNA, identifies the genome of the virus, and that test can tell us whether you are still infected or that you are newly infected and you have not created your own antibodies. And the other test is an antibody test, where serum antibodies which show that you have been infected. And in between these two, we can have people who are still infected and have already created their antibodies against the virus. What we do not know, and what is the next controversy, is whether antibodies in your blood means that you are definitely the viral infection can be prevented. That is, a reinfection cannot happen in you. We don't know that yet. So some countries have gone ahead with testing for antibodies and the viral material, but Britain has held up. It's not ready to go on with this test because there are a few tests that have been bandied around, but they are not sure that they can give us definite answers to this. So in the UK, we are not using the antibody tests as yet. But if you don't, you're just infected and you have no symptoms, or you just have mild symptoms, it is believed that by 14 to 20 days you should have shed, the virus, and that if you are retested, then you could find out that most people should have no infection, any further infection.
Now, somebody who is treated and tested negative, can that same person contract the virus a second time, a third time?
That is exactly what we don't know. That is why the British government has said, or the medical council in the UK has advised, that we shouldn't use the antibody test that tells you that you have had the infection, because we are not sure whether you can be reinfected. Potentially, in theory, you shouldn't be able to have an infection again. But we don't know about this virus. This is a new virus. We don't know whether the immunity we get from being infected is a long-term immunity. So that is a question that we can answer only in later period of dealing with this virus.
All right, Dr. Aloysius MBAKO, speaking to us from Wrexham, Wales, in the United Kingdom. I want to ask you this question about African traditional medicine. What do you think about all the African traditional medicines that have been presented here and there, or even on social media and so on, which some tradi practitioners think that the administration of African traditional medicine can have a significant impact, can even cure COVID-19?
I think it's legitimate and interesting to pursue such an avenue. And I think, of course, all medications come from plants, and most of the plants are African plants. And I myself, growing up as a child, I saw how plants were used to treat us. But so the African pharmacopoeia can be pursued. I know colleagues, for example, Colonel Wanji, who has made 4 different drugs from plants, and but it took him about 10 to 14 years to come out with the drug, because of the process through which you have to go. A lot of African pharmacopoeia people who know don't want to expose themselves to Western influences which can, hijack their medication. So they should be, I think that with the scientific research section of in our country, medicinal research should concentrate on trying to see whether we can get drugs that can, through observation, have been shown to heal certain diseases, including the COVID. Now, talking about drugs, I don't think that we should, because we have had 100 people who have responded to a drug, we can say that that drug is definitely a good drug, or it can work. The process of approving a drug is a very long process, because it involves various steps, and therefore we have to follow all these steps before we come out with a conclusion that a drug is effective, that a drug is safe, that and that it doesn't have any side effects. Therefore, it's a long process. We cannot just say it. I think it's a long process that should be attacked scientifically. Both the scientific community and the native doctors, or sorry, the medicinal plant people should work together, and I think it's something we should pursue.
As of now, there is no cure for COVID-19, and it is often said that prevention is better than cure. So, Doctor, what advice do you have for Cameroonians and Africans at large with regards to the preventive measures against COVID-19?
I think we cannot go very far. The preventive measures have been emphasized time and again, and I think that people should keep proper hygiene, wash their hands, don't touch their faces, make sure that they maintain a distance. They should really avoid contact of certain things and clean up wherever it's necessary. And I think water and soap are very good for the virus, because the virus has a lipid coating which is affected easily by soap and can destroy the virus. So if people keep those measures and then travel very little, if it's not necessary, people shouldn't travel, but as it's been shown, I think I will say that masks are quite important for us, because it's been demonstrated that in Czechoslovakia and in Hong Kong, which has a very dense population, and all of the people there wear masks. I was there last year, and the infection rate is quite low, and this is explained by the fact that Babila, believe it or not, as I am speaking or you are speaking, we are projecting microglobules. They are not big, large sputums, but microscopic cameras have shown that we project these microglobules that stay in the air for over 2 hours. So you passing where I just spoke, could mean you get infected from my virus. So I think we should do what we can do. And also another thing is that the masks, we don't need to have medical masks. We can have in Czechoslovakia, so the Czech Republic, all the masks were made locally. They made 10 million masks in 3 days, and everybody had to have a mask. And we can have a mask. And if we want better masks, we can double them up, double the layers, and we can also use filters for the masks. And the advantage of this is that they are washable masks. We take them off and we can wash them with soap and water. And I think that is something we should do. If the government has something to do, they should in fact provide water, because it's very important now. Water has become very important. And if the government if they are talking of washing hands, we need water.
Dr. Aloysius MBAKO, military doctor and the chairman of the Cameroon Medical Council and a member of the Cameroon Doctors Association in the United Kingdom, speaking to us from Wrexham, Wales. Thanks for joining us on this edition of The Insight.
Thank you, Jonathan, for giving me this opportunity.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today.